Hello and welcome. Today, we are talking about a huge challenge that's no longer on the horizon. It's right here in the boardroom. How do you actually make smart decisions when the future is being completely reshaped by climate change? It's a world of massive uncertainty, but don't worry, there's a powerful tool that's designed to help us navigate it all. So let's just dive right in with the big one, right? How in the world do you plan for a future you can't possibly predict? Now, for businesses, for investors, for policymakers, this isn't some philosophical thought experiment. The kind of uncertainty we're facing from climate change makes traditional forecasting, well, pretty much obsolete. So, what's the alternative? Here's our game plan for today. We'll start with the tool itself, then we'll break down its key building blocks. After that, we'll get really practical and talk about how you design your own analysis, look at the two main flavors of risk you need to assess, and then we'll wrap up with why this whole thing is so much more than a box-ticking exercise. It's become a strategic necessity. Okay, so when the future is this murky, the old ways of doing things, simple forecasting, they just don't cut it anymore. They're built on an assumption of predictability that climate change has basically shattered. We need a totally new approach, a tool that's built to explore what might happen, not predict it. And that tool is scenario analysis. Now, let's be super clear. This is not about gazing into a crystal ball. The point is not to guess the one right answer. It's all about using structured, well-thought-out stories to map out a whole range of different but plausible futures. By stress testing your strategy against these different pathways, you start to build real resilience no matter which version of the future actually happens. So how does this actually work? Well, you don't just pull these scenarios out of thin air. To make sure the results are solid and that we can compare apples to apples across different organizations, the whole analysis is built on a set of standardized reference scenarios that folks all over the world use. The first building block you've got to know about are RCPs, which stands for Representative Concentration Pathways. These come from the IPCC, and they're really the scientific foundation. Basically, they model how much extra heat the planet is going to trap based on different amounts of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Think of them as different climate destinations. For example, RCP 2.6 is kind of the best-case scenario, where we actually hit our Paris Agreement goals. On the other end, you've got something like RCP 8.5, which is more of a business-as-usual path that leads to much, much higher warming. But of course, climate outcomes don't just happen in a vacuum, right? They're shaped by us, by society. And that's where SSPs, or shared socioeconomic pathways, come into the picture. These scenarios describe the world we'll be living in. What happens with population, economic growth, technology. The key thing is they're designed to be paired up with the RCPs to create a much fuller story. So here's how you can think about them working together. The RCPs answer the science question: what happens to the actual climate? The SSPs, on the other hand, answer the social question: what does the world we're living in look like while that's all going down? You absolutely need both to get a complete picture, the climate outcome and the human context it's happening in. Now, while the IPCC's work is kind of the bedrock here, they're not the only game in town. Other major groups provide really influential scenarios, often with a specific focus. You've got the International Energy Agency, whose work is absolutely essential for the energy sector. And then there's the Network for Greening the Financial System, which, as you can guess, creates scenarios specifically for banks and financial regulators. Okay, time to get practical. Using these reference scenarios isn't just a simple plug-and-play operation. Nope. Every single organization has to make a bunch of critical decisions to really tailor the analysis to their specific business, their geography, and the strategic questions they're trying to answer. This table shows the key decisions you have to make, so let's walk through them. First up, time horizons. Are you worried about the next 5 years, or are you planning for 2050 and beyond? Next, granularity. Are we looking at the whole world, or do we need to zoom in on one specific factory? Then you pick your set of scenarios. Are you going to model an orderly future with smooth policy changes, a disorderly one with sudden, chaotic shifts, or a hothouse world where we just don't do enough? After that, you choose your data and modeling tools. And finally, the big one. How do you translate all of this into financial impact? What does it mean for your revenue, your costs, your asset values? Every one of these choices really matters. All right, now we get to the real meat of the analysis. Once you've got your approach designed, you use it to look at two fundamentally different kinds of climate risk, what we call transition risk and physical risk. And you really need to understand the difference here. Transition risk is all about the speed of the shift away from fossil fuels. If it's abrupt and messy, that creates huge risks from new policies or technologies. But for physical risk, it's a totally different story.
Because of how the climate system works, a lot of the physical impacts we're going to see over the next couple of decades are already baked in from our past emissions. So the analysis there is less about which path we take and much more about preparing for what we know is already coming.
And this is a really critical point about physical risk. This is not some abstract, high-level exercise. It absolutely has to start at the asset level. We are talking about tangible, specific, real-world impacts. A factory in a floodplain, a warehouse in a wildfire zone, an office that becomes unbearable during a heat wave. The process for doing this is actually very methodical. First, you identify the hazards for your specific locations, things like bigger storms or longer droughts. Second, you translate that to impacts, using climate models to see what that means in terms of, say, flood depth. Third, you assess the operational effects. How will that flooding disrupt your site or your supply chain? And finally, the most important step, you use everything you've learned to build resilience, creating concrete plans to get ready and reduce the potential damage. So we've covered what it is and how it works, but why is this becoming such a big deal? The answer is that we're seeing this evolve super fast from being just a compliance chore to becoming a core driver of strategy and a real source of competitive advantage. I mean, just look at how broadly this is used. It's for setting the entire corporate strategy. It's for having honest conversations with investors. It's a vital tool for managing operational risk and building that resilience we keep talking about. For banks and funds, it's key to portfolio analysis. And what's maybe most exciting is that it's also a tool for looking past the risks to find the opportunities. And this is what's so powerful. A good analysis doesn't just show you a list of scary things to avoid. By really exploring these different potential worlds, it can light up where new markets are going to pop up, what new products and services people are going to need, and how you can position your organization to be the one that thrives in that new reality. If you only remember one thing from our time today, please let it be this. We cannot know exactly what the future holds. And honestly, anyone who tells you they can is probably selling something. The real, true value of scenario analysis isn't in getting the prediction right. It's in making your organization strong, agile, and ready for whatever comes. It's not about prediction. It is all about preparation. So as we wrap this up, the final question isn't what's going to happen. It's a question for you, for your organization. When you look at all the possible futures that are out there, are you prepared for the possibilities?